Hi, welcome SUSE QE Tools Workshop. Today will be about needling best practices. So I can immediately jump into sharing my screen. And I would really be happy if you can also share some examples of best practices for creating OpenQA needles or for maintaining OpenQA needles, for updating OpenQA needles. Some challenges or fun stories or where stuff has really gone wrong, or also success stories, seeing where a nicely designed OpenQA needle could really find some issues, and maybe even cases where it wasn't foreseen that it would be able to help there. I will start giving an overview, taking a look into some documented practices. Then we can look into an example, and then you can add at any time examples that you have to share, or if you like, take over sharing the screen and showing some examples yourself. So OpenQA needles, I don't want to explain in all details, but basically one of the main concepts of OpenQA is that we can do graphical testing based on so-called needles, being reference images and parameters like where on a screen should OpenQA look and see if the screen matches the expected content, and only if that is met, then continue with the testing. We have on the Progress OpenSUSE.org projects OpenQA tests wiki, we have some needling best practices recorded. It also mentions the OpenQA pitfalls document, which has some other hints. For example, if a needle is deleted, old tests may display an error when viewing them in the web UI. Tests still work. Examples which I mentioned here is how to apply workaround needles, that it's better to create new needles with an updated timestamp rather than using the old date. If you're in a table, better have separate sections. And here's also a visual example where one should normally not include a version number in the needle itself. You can see that example here, Firefox. If the needle area, the area which is shown as green, so what OpenQA would look at to compare between matches, that if the needle area would cover that number, and if we tell OpenQA to be strict enough, then yeah, it would very soon fail again as soon as we have a different version number. By the way, now Firefox reached a version of 100 and above since that example was created. Now, let's go into an example. I'm just taking a look at the latest OpenSUSE Tumbleweed snapshot. And in here, we have tests. I would assume that all of the tests use needles, at least a single needle to check for the boot up process, but many tests have already used additional ways of conducting tests and checking on the expected outcome. For example, just relying on a serial terminal, which is a good thing because these were things which were added to OpenQA later. And yeah, I know there's still the rumor that OpenQA can only check what's displayed on the screen, which isn't the case, because OpenQA can also check just based on what's output on an SSH terminal, on the serial TTY, or anything like that. So I'm just picking the first test that is displayed here. And what we can see is that whenever we have this little thumbnail boxes, which looks like a screenshot from the actual system, and it has a colored border around, then this is the case where we actually have a screenshot recorded and a needle that reference screenshot compared. So let's just take a look at that example and let's take a look what we see. So what I see is that we see a screenshot, and within the screenshot we have a colored box showing the 100% and showing needle here. So what we see is, if I move that colored bar to the right, is that's the needle, that's the reference screenshot and the area that it looks into. So, you know, it's like a looking glass or like a filter. We only care about what's happening in that box, but we can actually, OpenGate tries to move that box around and see if something like that matches elsewhere on the screen, but is always limited by that filter. And the orange bar can be used for comparing. So we can see on the left-hand side, there's the needle. On the right-hand side, there's the screenshot. It says 100%, meaning 100% match, meaning that what is seen on the screen matches what we recorded in the reference. There's actually, if you take a look very closely, there's actually a difference between the needle and the screenshot. Who can tell me where the difference is? Anybody? Do you see the difference? Where does the needle differ from the screenshot? Let me give you a hint.
The mouse cursor? No, not it's no.
You mean that the triangle? Or
yeah.
no, that's
No.
we can see it in both cases, so it's not a mouse cursor, right? It's a very good point to keep a lookout for the mouse cursor. Maybe we find later examples where the mouse cursor making a problem. Yeah,
I think it's the how it's called, the glyph after the boot from hard disk.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So take a close look. Now that's what we see in the actual screenshot, and this is what it looks like in the needle. So you see that the circle looks different. It's not completed, right? Well, why is that? Because that's actually, it's animated. So in the boot menu, it's moving. Okay. So I would say it's actually not a perfect match. Why does it still show 100%? Who can explain that?
The erasure.
Right. So what we say 100% match is 100% match regarding the match ratio that we have defined. So we can tell a needle of how forgiving it should be or how strict it should be regarding the matching, which can also make a difference based on the size of the screen. So OpenGA works in that way, same as a human would do. If I'm asking you to tell me a difference in like a picture that's covering the complete wall, you would have a much harder time to spot on it any difference than if I would just tell you like the difference is within that very little area, like the size of a stamp. And this is what OpenGA is doing as well. So it says, yeah, 100% because, you know, there is a tiny mismatch, but, you know, it's within the range of allowed changes.
Well, yeah, question there.
Yep.
So the 100% is the 100% relative to the percentage that we define as okay, which typically is, I don't know, 95% or something, right?
Yeah, we can check. So if I open the needle editor and if I click here, then yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that it doesn't show here. So I need to zoom out again. Here, 96%, that's the default, right?
Why, if this is the case, why do we never see a percentage higher than 100%? I mean, if we have really the perfect needle match and we
Yes.
match only to 96%, then I would expect that we also occasionally see percentages higher than 100% because that's math. Why don't we see that?
Yeah, you're right. So I hope someone can correct me if I'm telling stupid things here. So what I said should be the right thing, that we actually, you say 100% means matching according to the match level. Maybe we clip it at 100%.
I actually thought it is just if we are above or at the match level, we accept it even if it's just a 96% match and we don't scale it up in the calculation. But the fact that you get the 100% match here is because the spinner is actually in an exclude area.
That makes sense, yeah.
Oh, right. I haven't seen that. So that's a good point. Which is actually a good practice. So what we have here is within that area, excluding that, then we have a perfect match. And this is why we have exclude areas. So yeah, sorry, I didn't see that. But actually, I see. Yeah. So the light gray. See, this is how the actual screenshot looks like. So I was confusing that. So thank you. The light gray actually shows that this is an exclude area. Yeah, I thought the box would be part of the screenshot, but yeah, it's actually, see, this is how easy it is to get it wrong, and how good the system provides something. Yeah. So yeah, that's the screenshot, and exactly that's the best practice here to say, yeah, you can cover the big area, but you can exclude the areas where you say like, yeah, even if something moves in there, then we are good. Right. So that would be the next example. And here I would say it's simple. Yeah, Pavel, go on.
Well, if you have a multiple area marked and they are overlapping, then it's a bit unclear which is like first and which is second. And also, if you have multiple matching areas, but you also clicking the matching area, I think you're clicking the last one. And yeah, it's just maybe you're confusing if I remember correctly. Or is there some hack for this or some pro tip or something like that?
I think originally it was like that when you have multiple areas and the next command would be to click on a match, then it would click on the last box. That's correct. The one that is defined as the latest one. But I think we added an option there. Let's check that. So if I go in
now we actually have a so-called click area, which you can
big area,
add
yeah.
in click inside one of the bottom inside one of the areas, which also means you can move it actually to the side, so it doesn't have to be spot on center anymore, which was the original thing.
Yes. So we have, you know, that would be the normal, like where you say a certain click, right? And a click last match doesn't do the check. So a certain click is like, that's what the word "and" says. It's like combining both. But we have the possibility there to define these areas. And if we go here, then you can see add click coordinates for a certain click. When you don't want to click just in the middle of one area, then you can add specific coordinates. So normally the most simple, if you want to click, is actually case like that, where you say, okay, of course, in this boot menu, it doesn't make sense to click, but you know, if you would have a single button and you can clearly identify the button and it's fine to click in the middle, just define one area and then a certain click word. If you need to have multiple areas, like for example in a table, and the space between the columns in a table can change based on resolution if the window is resized, or depending on maybe started in GNOME or in KDE and you want to have the same needle, then it makes sense to have multiple areas. But then maybe the clicking isn't so easy anymore, because maybe sometimes you need to define an area to unambiguously identify an entry, but you cannot click anymore in the middle. Then you can use @click coordinates for certain click. Let's use this example. When you say, if you just want to click on installation, then it's fine. Let's assume that the menu would show install Tumbleweed and install Leap in parallel. So that needle installation might match both entries. So you would extend it to the right when there would be a word something like installation of Tumbleweed. Yeah? So we'd extend it to the right so that it would fit both. But let's say that the click point must be on the left-hand side. What I would do as a workaround, if that works, not as a workaround, as a simple solution, is to say, well, just space it out to the left so that the middle of the area would still be a good clicking point, but on the right-hand side, you would still uniquely identify the area I want to click. And if that doesn't work, or if that is creating a needle which might be too confusing to anyone else, then you can add click coordinates. Okay? Or
Yeah.
in that case.
And those
Like this.
coordinates, you can specify them relatively to the area selected? No.
Yeah, let's review the JSON. So we have the height and the width of the box. We have the YPOS and the XPOS, and we have the click point defined. If I move that area elsewhere, then you can see that the click point is still 5116. So it's still the same relative to the area within which you specify that. And yeah, and you can see that, oops, sorry. You can see that these curly braces show this is the area and the click point is within that area. So it belongs to that area. If I come up with a second area and a third area, then you see that this click point belongs there. And if I select that box and now I'm adding click coordinates here, then we have it in the different area. Of course, you cannot have multiple. I never tried it myself, but whoever did that did the right thing. So you cannot define multiple click coordinates at the same time. Yeah, you can only click on one point at a time. Makes sense, right? Okay, so let's go back.
If I may,
yeah.
click coordinates can also be outside of the area which you actually matched, which is a bit confusing for most people.
Marius, thank you for implementing the right. Okay, let's actually try that. So I couldn't think of a use case where it makes sense, but maybe why not? So I can move that. Wait, you said I can move it on?
Doesn't work anymore, apparently.
Okay. So okay. If anybody sees the use case for and now I don't think. I think I managed to put it outside. See?
So it's only outside if you manage to actually resize the box.
Aha. So I fooled the system. Yeah. Or, well, maybe they would actually be useful. Yeah. But I would say it's okay. I mean, you can define that and you think that's the right thing. It should be obvious what you do there. I would say it's visible what you do. Okay, let's take a look into the next example. So for example, here, that's rather simple. Role selection screen. Okay. We have multiple candidates here. So why do they differ? because that one says 95%. I think the background color changed a bit because the font itself looks the same, but the actual the tone of gray is different. So yeah, this is why it's fine to update sometimes. The interesting thing is that whoever created that needle, you know, the only difference here is in the timestamp. So sometimes you don't know, but I think if you can, then please make it more specific. So for example, like here, role selection leap 15.1. I would say like, yeah, okay, so this is how it looked like in leap 15.1. You can see that it's bigger than that. Why is it moving it here? Well, because it doesn't match at all. So OpenGate doesn't even know where to put it because it can cannot check for a scaled match. So yeah, specify it, and then there are also possibilities to use certain environment variables where you can say something like this only matches for env distri OpenSUSE, which is kind of redundant here because it's the OpenSUSE needle distribution, but you know, for distinguishing something like micro OS and OpenSUSE, that can help.
Why would you say environment variables?
Uh,
So tags.
well, it's called env, and env is a shortcut for environment.
Yeah, but I don't think you could specify arbitrary variables here, or can you?
Second?
Can you specify arbitrary variables here
Yes.
that the test
Yes.
is not aware of?
Yes, I could call it env foobar1 to have that a Boolean switch, and then in my test code I could say exclude all variables with env foobar1 or env foobar0, and by doing that you can better segment the needle repository. And I know that often this isn't done, and if you take a look, this is a big list of needle already. So likely if you would check the log files, the order-ins log file, OpenGA is likely complaining already about the fact, or is not complaining, or is providing a warning that one should be careful because there are many needles defined, meaning that like multiple times per second, we need to check the current screenshot against all of these screens. Of course, a computer is always more efficient than humans doing that, but still, it can also be confusing to the human reviewers. So this is why it's a good practice to delete old needles, which are not necessary anymore. And this is why we have this needles administrator menu where you could check all needles that do not match anymore. But also you have the possibility to segment the needles to say, well, this is Tumbleweed's test, so why even check the role selection screen for leap? So that could be excluded with these variables. Bubble? Oh no, sorry, Yanis.
Just I was thinking, what happens if you have two matches? Have ever happened this? I don't know. I mean, if
Yes,
you have
yes,
100%, but yeah,
that can
Is it-
happen. Let's check if we find a soft fail, which is also often defined by a soft failed needle match. Maybe I have a higher chance in desktop apps to find an actually soft fail needle. Yes, here we go. So here we see that we have this soft fail match, and yeah, okay, we don't have multiple matches here, but you can have multiple matches, and then the soft fail needle, if there's a workaround needle, a needle with a workaround property which matches, then that one wins. And otherwise, I'm not sure about the order. So, but yeah, multiple matches are allowed. One of them is taking. If there's a workaround needle, these needles are always preferred. Okay, and I would say that's a common case. So let's say someone has that needle, which people say like, yeah, it's actually fine, and then someone else says like, oh no, it's actually a bug. So if that is shown, please record it as workaround. I'm adding a description here, referencing a ticket, and saving that needle, not deleting the old needle. That will be fine because both needles will match, but the workaround needle will be preferred, meaning that we will actually see that at the top of the list as the match, and we will see it recorded here as the soft fail, and hence reference that ticket. Okay.
The consequence is that you should always make workaround needles as restrictive as possible and try to match only the part that needs a workaround.
Right, thank you. That's a good point, because if you do not want to match a soft fail needle because there's actually not a bug shown, then please also prevent that by making it as restricted as possible. Really only check on the error content. Okay, so let's go to next examples. I think there are also some other examples here in the installer which would be helpful. So yeah, I would say that one is fine. And then there's another example, that one, right? And that one is also important, because if you think about it, we could also check the video and we would actually, well, let's actually try that. Maybe we don't see it. Yeah, it's likely too quick to see it, but I guess you know what you would see here. So what do you see on the screen, and what would you normally see as a human if you have a screen like that, like here? If you have a prompt, how does the prompt tell you that it's responsive and it's that it's able to take your input?
Hashtag blank and then nothing.
Nothing?
A cursor.
A cursor? Thank you, Tina. And that cursor is either some kind of bar or block, and sometimes it's blinking. In this case, because that's a Getty, the Getty on like on TTY2, that one actually flashes. If you take a look at the video like very shortly, you will be able to see that. Yeah, you saw in the 2 lines below, there's actually flashing shortly. So this is why this needle, it actually has in the name no cursor. And the needle, it looks like somebody was a bit sloppy because it's a bit tilted upwards. You see that? It's why, yeah, it's hardly covering the hash sign. Why is that? Well, we want to exclude the cursor. We don't want to care if the cursor is actually shown at that instance, at that moment, or not shown. Okay, so this is how a proper needle is defined. Why is it trying to cover so much of the blank area?
To ensure that no comment is being typed in.
Yeah, exactly, because you know, if it would be shorter like this, then it would match just as well on the line above, right? You see that just the content of the box looks the same, but it's not a free prompt because there is text behind that. So it's good to include the area to the right, and it's good to not include so much from the bottom and actually leave out a little bit from the hash sign, because you know, we really do not want the cursor to be included here. Now, if you cannot avoid that, if you actually want to include something which is like in that case where there would be something like a flashing icon or a cursor, then you still have a chance to use an option to assert screen, which is the no wait option. Specify no wait to run the screen check as fast as possible. That is possibly more than once per second, which is default. Okay, select this to check a screen which can change in a range faster than 1 to 2 seconds, not to miss the screenshot check for. I can tell you the story behind that. Why do we even have that? Well, we had a test which failed, and then you would take a look at the screenshot and say like, wait, but why? The needle matches the prompt. We see the prompt, but it's still failing. And then if you could take a very close look, you would actually see in a needle that yeah, okay, so obviously we don't have these needles anymore. You would see in the needle was the cursor, but in the screenshot it wasn't. But you would say like, but you know, the needle is waiting for a match for 30 seconds and checking for 30 seconds continuously every 1 second or every half a second, and still you don't see that there's a prompt. What happened? Who knows? Well, easy. The screen was checked exactly every 500 milliseconds. And the cursor blinked with exactly that rate. And we hit that prompt the first time exactly when the cursor was showing up, but the needle was expecting that there's no cursor. But it always looked at the very same time, always the same time in the same interval, when actually the screen showed something different. Okay? So what we did there is a change to say like, well, in the first case, you should prevent that with proper needle design. This is why we're here for. If you still need that, then you can use the no wait option. And then it checks as fast as possible, meaning non-fixed time interval, meaning that very likely you will find the cases where the cursor shows up or not shows up and not care about it. Pavel?
Can you prevent this issues with animation or timing by well, by checking for the needle like further, like maybe doing few screenshots and then merging them, and now it's
Yes.
probably nonsense, right? I mean,
yeah, it would be possible to check. So, you know, to have two needles, one with the cursor and one without, and one of the two would match, right? Same in that example. To, you know, if you want to match on that, if there's I think this animation was 4 states. Is it like a full circle, quarter circle, half circle, 3/4 circle, and a full circle? So yeah, you could have four needles, each covering their own state, and that would work. But I guess you understand an exclude area or not covering that in a needle at all is better than needing to maintain 4 needles, because anybody else would need to understand, why did Pavel create 4 needles here for, you know, what looks to me as a human as the same thing all over, right?
yeah, well, I meant something like, you know, longer exposure in photography, but yeah, that is just to exclude those animated things, and yeah.
Right, I see. So in theory, you could overlay 2 pictures and say that, well, if half a cursor is shown and then you only take a look very roughly, like with a lower match ratio, this might work. But honestly, well, yeah, in theory, yes. Okay, let's take a look at other examples. All right, so that's another example. Sure, why not? It actually has four match areas. These 2 above and these 2 below. So why are these 2 areas separated? Well, it's from 2019. I don't know who created the needle. We could take a look at the Git log, but anyone wants to make a guess?
So the spacing between words can be different?
Yeah, I guess so. Normally you would say I'm just using that block, but sometimes the spacing, you know, it it wiggles around a bit. So OpenKA can be very good to detect such cases, and we did report a lot of bugs about that, and some were happily accepted because people wanted to have a crisp and clear font rendering. But in some cases, people said like, why do you even care about such details? And then we could say like, okay, fine, then, you know, the two words show up, and if the space is a bit bigger or not, let's not care about it, because that can depend on screen set resolutions, if you forward that screen over SSH, if you display it in VNC or physical screen, anything like that. Bubble?
And Oliver, if you select the percentage of what part of the image should be matched to something lower, like 80%.
Yes.
So if instead of partition there would be another word, it would not match it. But if just the spacing changed, that it still match.
It would likely still not match. Because if the word is like shifted by some pixels to the right, then the difference is still too big. But there are other examples below here. So if you take a very close look, then you see that these words have hotkeys defined, and you see that underscore icon. And now that's the choice of the test maintainer. Do you need the hotkey to be visualized like that with the underscore below the G? Then yes, make sure that you're strict. If you don't care about that because Just automatically assigns the hotkeys based on available buttons and the available keys, and you say, yeah, we are using mouse clicks anyway, we don't care about the hotkey, then having a more conservative, a bit lower match ratio would mean that, yeah, if these pixels are gone, but the rest of the words still show up, that's a good enough match, and it would still match. Okay. All right. I think there are other examples which can also help us to visualize some cases. Yeah, that one. I think this one is actually an incorrect needle, because the needle says installation overview, installation settings overview loaded. But if I take a look at the screen, I would say, well, it didn't finish loading. It's still analyzing the system. Also, the next key is grayed out, so it's not active yet. And the needle tag says installation settings overview loaded. I would say the needle is wrong. Probably with the Just squad using a different approach to control the test, it doesn't really matter. Or it's a race condition which didn't hit any of you. But the original intention was, well, installation settings overview loaded explicitly says loaded, meaning it should wait until the screen, you know, is loaded and finished loading. And this isn't the case here. If we take a look into the existing cases from where the needle was created on, it looked like that, you see? So there's content here, and the buttons are responsive. You can see that there's different coloring, and the content of the box changes. So yes, it's a good idea to not match on the bulk of content, because, you know, we don't care what content is there. We care that the header is shown, that we are on the right page, and we care that we can actually proceed to whatever is the next page. And more examples, and you can see this also, right?
I think that was actually the intention why the lower right area is part of the needle as well, to make sure the buttons are shown properly.
Exactly. So, but what we can see here is that the next button is next. Yeah. So I would say someone was too. Let's check again. So
honest thing, because in the needle that button is actually correctly showing install, whereas in the match it's still next. So the fact that it matches at such a high rate is a bit surprising.
It is surprising, yeah. But this is why I would be more specific here to for example, by just using, I really want that button to show up like that and not differently. So I would make the area really small and not cover the other buttons. I don't think we would need the other buttons. If we do need the other buttons, that's fine. So let's just say this must be 100% because we need to be really strict here, right? So yeah, of course, I mean, it's the same as in software development everywhere else. If you do changes, you should test. And one test is the happy path. So, most people create a needle. And if you create a needle, then conveniently OpenKey offers to restart the test. It will use the updated needle. Likely then you will see that the test passes. So you say happy path is fulfilled because now the test doesn't fail anymore and we can continue. But the very next best test that you should conduct is the cross-check. To say, well, does the needle also not match when it should not match, right? And it seems we have found a case where that isn't the case. Why did nobody fix that? Well, because the test gladly still continued. Okay, yeah. This is another case. The system will reboot now. I mean, that one is fine. If we take a look how different variants look like, we have that one version, and you can see that there's a difference here. The button is changing in size a bit. Okay, can happen. So maybe a good choice would be to say, I don't care about the size of the button. I just care that the OK within is shown. So this is why I commonly for buttons, when I create needles, I do it within the button margins, something like that. Okay. And then it's fine. Why is it covering a bit more blank space? I think that's okay. And sometimes it's even a good case to cover as much as possible. I already showed in the bootloader case that sometimes we want to make it explicit that we expect that there is nothing showing up here, because maybe if there is something showing up, then maybe it's not the right case anymore, which we want to prevent from matching. Okay. Any other cases you have in live tests, or are there other stories you guys would like to share from examples where there was really weird matches? I know that Dimster, for example, sometimes you find really odd cases in and share that in the OpenSUSE Factory RSC chat channel, where either there
the
is.
typical thing is that we have a needle matching where it shouldn't, and then the system behaves completely differently because it believes that it has a different route.
Yeah.
Mostly in things like, do I see now a screensaver or is this a login screen? And depending on which, I have to do different actions.
Right.
But I wouldn't have any examples which I could just point you at where this happens. It didn't happen for a while now.
Yeah, I know, for example, that the browser tests, I know that they are annoying to some, but they have shown multiple cases of a web page being down when nobody else reported that the web page is being down, including OpenSUSE pages, which are down, and OpenKey tests are the best monitoring we have for that, based on the browser test, like that one here, where we do the HTML5 test. So this one is fine. We see that we render something, and yeah, this is a good example of a needle. So how would you detect that Firefox has finished loading a page? Well, the needle shows you, just take a look here. Don't take a look anywhere else, because if that button shows up to reload, then you're done. right? Or cases like these. So why is the needle not matching the actual score? Well, because the score changes more often. But as we can see, HTML5 tests didn't change the range of what's theoretically possible to achieve since at least 3 years. So that's since about 3 years. So that's a good thing. And that's the example which I mentioned in before. It's a good idea to check for that content. Why do we actually have that check? I remember that we had certain maybe just internal builds of the product where the content wasn't filled. So it showed something like Firefox for percentage product percentage or something, and the variable wasn't replaced. So here we see like, yeah, okay, it shows OpenSUSE, it shows Tumbleweed, and it shows what looks like correctly rendered text. And we don't include the version, which is a good idea. Otherwise, we would need to change that every couple of weeks. Yeah, the desktop string is also classical example of easy to get wrong, but as you can see from the age, so that needle is in place since more than a year, means that somebody did a really good design so that it's rather stable, because stuff changes. Of course, now if the desktop background would be replaced again, it would be updated again. That would mismatch again, but I guess that's okay, because maybe these are cases where you say like, oh yeah, I want to check that this correctly rendered. This, I think, is another good example where someone designed a good needle to say, rather make it a bit smaller. It's like it's cutting off the edges, which is a good thing, because we don't want to care if that tiny line or the border changes in rendering, as long as we can still recognize the key core, right? Yanis?
Can you talk briefly about some variables that actually pick up some specific tags, like
Yes, good point.
when is SLE 15 and above?
Right. That's one last example regarding changing content on the screen, which I would like to share. So GLX gears, if you know that, oops, sorry, misclicked. Let's see. Too quick.
You can use the arrows.
Yeah, but I want to show you that it's actually moving, because this is testing live rendering. And how do you check that with a needle? Well, here you see how you would check that. It doesn't check that it's actually moving, sure, but this is the part which doesn't change and still shows like at least 3 gears show up. It's likely if the gears show up, then they also move, because if the rendering doesn't work at all, then likely the gears don't show up. And this is how you check.
What's the value of this needle?
The value is that we actually checking that there is something rendered on the screen. When there's any problem in the OpenGL stack, and this is very unlikely to work, so I see that as a rather simple and rather easy test, but quite valuable. Simster, would you agree with that?
Yeah, keep also in mind that nowadays GLX gears is probably not that important anymore, because if
Yeah,
you have
right.
a GL stack issue, we probably don't get GNOME and KDE up anyway. But originally this was a bit different, so GNOME and KDE were still running without the GL stack, and then this test actually made much more sense than nowadays.
That's a good point. So nowadays, what one could do is move that test module outside the actual KDE in GNOME test and say, just spawn a plain X server and GLX gears, and only if that works, try to spawn the display manager.
Right. I mean, on GNOME, if I don't have GL, I don't also see GNOME.
Right. That's correct. Okay, so Janis, what you meant is let's try to show that in the actual main test distribution that we have been using here as an example. So there is lib main common, and if we look for needles, then we see multiple remove needle functions. So for example, remove common needles. And what that one does is remove desktop needles. It might look a bit weird because you say like, well, why remove all these needles, all these precious needles? This example is easier, and remove desktop needles is just doing the same in a helper function. It says unregister needle text env video mux text unless check var video mode text. That, and the same examples continues like here. Unregister all S390 text needles unless we are on an S390 test system. Remove all Ubuntu needles unless we are on an Ubuntu system. Or turn it around in the logic to say, only keep Ubuntu needles when we are running an Ubuntu test. Only keep S390 needles when we have S390 test. And the same is here. Only keep needles which have env desktop LXDE when we are actually running a test which has desktop LXDE set. So you can have multiple sets of needles, but you can improve the performance and make it easier to maintain, to say, well, only show GNOME needles for GNOME tests. Imstar?
With those tags, if a needle would match on two desktops, is it possible to add two env desktop, let's say LXD XFCE, and the remove desktop needle keeping them, or how would that work if there are multiple matches?
Yeah, if you put the desktop tag there, this is basically like an exclusive variable. So it means
So I can't create a needle that says match on XFCE and LXD because they're close enough, but not on the rest.
No, it would more like be if you put LXDE and GNOME on a needle, it will be removed in one or in both cases. So it wouldn't help you for the LXDE and for the GNOME case. Of course, it would still help you for the KDE case because it would remove the needle because it matches either LXDE or GNOME. Okay.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, avoid that and just put one desktop there if it is only uniquely useful for one desktop. And if it's something that is, generic, like, the bootloader screen, yeah, just don't set the desktop tag because it's applicable to all. Now, was there another hand raised? Other questions or notes to that? So, Janis, does this cover your question?
I think it's important to mention because it's easy to miss these things. Many people, I don't think, that you go to the web UI and create the needle, and there is no review, and many miss these parts. And still, I don't see any solution on this. But yeah.
Yes, it's right.
It should be in the good practices, but it's not actually. If someone knows, it can point you here, but usually it's not happening, which
That's
creates a
correct.
mess.
Yeah, so using the needle editor, I mean, that's like suffering from its own success, because using the needle editor can sometimes be seen as too easy, right? You see that needle, is like, oh, okay, that looks fine. Just click the save button and then you have a new needle. But please think about, before doing that, why did the old needle not match anymore? Does it make sense to do that? It does mention the text that it read from the other needles in that area. Does it make sense to include it like here? check the log files for any warnings that I mentioned there. And yeah, and then try to be careful when doing that. There is another way to contribute to needles. Of course, we could enforce some practice by being much more restrictive and saying like the needle editor cannot be used on the live instance, maybe only for a selected set of people, and the bunch of people would need to submit needles via a GitHub pull request, because then everybody, all the reviewers would be able to review the JSON files. That comments there. Okay, guys, that brings us to the end of the workshop. Thank you all for your attendance, and thank you all for contributing here also with helpful examples, sharing your stories and experiences. So the next sessions, we have some proposals here, and then we also have some conferences coming up. For example, one is Skip Duty Open SUSE conference. Janis, would you be interested in the next week about the OpenQA test failure debugging? You know,
Yeah.
also sharing some pain stories there.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So then the next week will be about OpenQA test failure debugging group therapy session, motivated by Janis. Thank you all. See you again the next time. And
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
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 Thank